Good afternoon on what is a cool, grey and cloudy day. It is Saturday the 22nd of October. I'm in the reading nook. I've got a nice hot cup of tea and a box to continue unpacking. So, this is what I've pulled out so far, or what's in here. So far we have had, let's see, Vanishing Conjurer and Statue of the Sorcerer, Green and Pleasant Land, and they were both fun to unbox and chat about. But the next thing I'm going to pull out is Lurking Fears, which was published by Triad Entertainments in 1990. So, the fears that lurk and plot. The horrors of the Cthulhu mythos lurk in the darkest corners of our wholesome world. Sometimes they seek to pour forth from the darkened corners to wreak unimaginable havoc upon the earth. Within these pages are 6 such lurking fears, which must be faced by those intrepid few who have faced fears before and thwarted them. Can they do so again? From the Everglades of Florida to the deserts of Egypt, Lurking Fears pits the investigators against seldom before encountered creatures of the Cthulhu mythos, such as Glarky and the foul spawn of Aboth. Contained in this volume are 3 regular-length scenarios, one short one-nighter and a 2-part campaign which will take your band of investigators from the mountains of Carolina to an ancient shrine to the Great Old Ones and a confrontation with a ruthless undead villain. Included here are Rise of the Sleeper, in which an unexpected inheritance leads to a nightmare of undeath in the Florida Everglades. Call in the Desert, in which a carefree holiday in Egypt becomes a living nightmare from the nighted mists of prehistory. The Sundial of Amentet, in which a family crisis leads to a time-travelling madman. Sorrow's Glen, in which a morbid archaeological site conceals an abysmal horror. The Star Shrine, in which a vampire seeks to free the Great Old Ones. The Devourer, in which a star-spawned horror threatens to consume the world. Are you ready for the adventure? Are you ready for the nighted horror? Dare you face these lurking fears? That's Lurking Fears. You've got quite a blurb on the back there. Now, this presents 6 harrowing encounters with the Cthulhu mythos. It's by Michael Szymanski and Scott Aniolowski, and the latter is someone whose name you will recognise if you've played a lot of Call of Cthulhu, read a lot of Call of Cthulhu. He's written numerous scenarios in the past and occasionally comes back and writes more. He's a continuing contributor. So this is a supplement which would have been for 4th edition Call of Cthulhu, perhaps 5th edition. It's about that period. And inside we've got table of contents, quick welcome, and it's into the first scenario. And this is Rise of the Sleeper, in which an unexpected inheritance leads to a nightmare of undeath in the Florida Everglades. So this uses the kind of standard trope of, a relative you've not actually written into your background, whom you barely remember, suddenly dies, and you are his sole benefactor. It's a setup which dates back to the beginnings of Call of Cthulhu, and yes, it's a kind of gothic classic, but it does kind of get overused in this kind of setup, and you kind of go, is it my turn to inherit a strange house full of dark things that I had no idea my relative was involved in? Anyway, so the investigator receives this inheritance, and if that's not setting off alarm bells, I don't know what is. And the fact that it's set in the Florida Everglades probably isn't helping. But what compounds that, is this. It's set in New Dunwich. If that's not setting off a second set of alarm bells, what is? But you've got decent cartography here, and this is what they see. It's a rough, rundown place, and who would really want to live there? I mean, that dead relative has got to have a really good reason. So here we are, got the inside. The cartography is actually not bad. And it's actually full of decent artwork like that. And they're facing Servants of Glarky here, which has been used more. I mean, this came out in 1990, so this is at a time when Call of Cthulhu is just 9 years old as a role-playing game. So not every Call of Cthulhu monster or entity or god has been used by this time. Jump forward 32 years now. Since then, got the case. Glarkey's been used innumerable times, been revisited, and it's a very British great old one or entity, having been the creation of Ramsay Campbell. So, you know, at the time, most of the claim that sort of like this was using little used great old ones and entities would have been the case. And even today, if you dig into something like the Monstrous Malleus Monstrorum, the 2-volume set, you will find examples that have not been used. And part of the fun of that is really digging into that book and putting something out, finding a good use for it, and setting up a good story and investigation. So we've got quite a lot of description here of this house, and then we get into you know, we've got a handout, Brandon Young's notebook, which is, you know, Brandon Young being the dead NPC. We've got a ritual which they will have to enact to solve this problem. And they're set by mutant plants as well. And then at the heart of it, we actually have Glarkey, and that's actually a fantastic illustration of him. The artwork in here is actually really good, and there's some really good pieces in here. Because, I mean, I've looked at this before. I've got my own copy. This isn't mine. It's being forwarded. I just picked it up and took the chance to actually do an unboxing of it because I thought that people would like it, like to see it. And we've got details of the previous owners of the house, because, you know, in true Gothic style, you kind of need, like, you know, a family tree and identify who the villains are and so on. And then we've got a list of spells connected with Glarkey. Then the next scenario is the Caller in the Desert, in which a carefree holiday in Egypt becomes a living nightmare from the nighted mists of prehistory. Now, it seems odd for a scenario which presumably is set in the 1920s. We're going on holiday to Egypt, especially from America. That seems an odd place to go, kind of. But essentially what happens is they visit this mosque, and there's this giant finger of rock thrusting up out of the ground. It's a venerated site, got a mosque next to it, and then of course we have nearby a serpent man's tomb. Now, again, another monster that's been used a lot since, but nevertheless, this is quite a short scenario. Encountered with Bedouins, sand dwellers, and presumably that kind of makes for a much more physical scenario, because sand dwellers are not necessarily subtle creatures, as it were. Scott David Aniolowski's second scenario is the Sundial of Amantet, in which the family crisis leads to a time-travelling madman. And this takes place in Clarkson City, Buffalo, home of Iris Kramer. Yeah, I think that really the only time I can remember the Call of Cthulhu visiting Buffalo would be in Fungi from Your Goth, or Day of the Beast, as it's now known, in which the player characters visit to the home of a psychic at Paul. I can't remember his surname. And that's really the only time that I can think of. But here we actually have it set in Buffalo, in sort of like upstate New York. You can get to Buffalo Memorial Hospital. So there's a bit of investigation there going on. This is a bit more involved necessarily than the other scenarios in terms of finding things out. The other ones feel a bit more physical, as it were, especially the smaller one. And great involves the speakeasy. Speakeasies would have been everywhere in the 1920s, because, you know, the mob wanted outlets for the alcohol and people wanted to drink. Even get to visit Buffalo Zoo. No map of Buffalo though, which would have been useful. And then we've got basically the villain's house, complete with a gug's lair there. In the basement, and strangely, we have a sort of conflation of monsters here. So we've got a gug, a presumably that is possibly Nyarlathotep, one of his many aspects. That it feels appropriate, especially given its Egyptian connection. And then there's an illustration of somebody being sacrificed to a hand of Tindalos. So yeah, we've got more investigation, encounters of the hounds of Tindalos, more handouts, more newspaper handouts. Those are quite dense. So there's quite a lot to go through on here. We've got exploration of a mine. So pushing your way through, so lots going on. Deep into you descend into the mound, into the mine, and find it strewn with skeletons. Before we reach the temple of Gatononofoa, very organic there. That's nicely done, and you've got an illustration of that. And these full piece illustrations are really quite nice. And then we've got the icosahedron, a history of that foul device, including with all the glyphs upon it. Michael Szymanski's next scenario is the Starshine, in which a vampire seeks to free the Great Old Ones. And what I've actually done is I've actually switched over, because this is my fault. This is Sorrow's Glen. So I've actually switched over. So the previous scenario is Sorrow's Glen, in which that's his second scenario. A morbid archaeological site conceals an abyssal horror. Sorry about that. So there's quite a bit of investigation in this one, and this one. Trying to work out where this is set. Can't see. Hopefully it's Scotland, because having a glen elsewhere is foolish. Let's have a look. It's in the Appalachians, so well, maybe they do have glens in the Appalachians. I would be none the wiser. So yes, you've got this. Of course, this is actually appropriate to the Appalachians. You've got the mine network and ending, which ultimately leads down to this vault and layer of Gatononofoa. So we switch next to the Starshine, which is Michael Szymanski's third scenario in the book. And this follows on from this Sorrow's Glen. So you've got more handouts, plain, but they're serviceable. You know, they're enough to get the player character involved. And this takes place over sort of like in a small town, because you've got a neighbourhood there presented complete with zombie tunnels and sewers. So yeah, and then you have you only get out to the player character. The investigators go out to follow up Desmond Collins, and get to the Collins estate. And you look at that and you just go, you show that to the player characters, and they're going to be going, right, yeah, okay, got it. You know, if you're going to show a pentagon layout like that, yeah, there's something weird going on. The cartography in this scenario is not as good. It's plainer and it's not as interesting. So we have an event here because it includes, we have Desmond Collins' guest list, and that includes a werewolf, a witch, an alchemist, a sorcerer, a psychic, and associated persons. And of course, Rufus Marsh, a deep one with 75% mythos skill. And then we get to the shrine itself, lies in the realm serpent folk. Again, we have a nice organic feel to the tunnels and the star shrine and its environs. More of this decent artwork. And what ultimately summoned. And then Michael Szymanski's fifth scenario in here is the Devourer. This is the last scenario in here, in which an all-consuming horror threatens to devour the earth. Essentially, this takes them to Arkham. We solve the mystery of a vanishing professor of geology. So, kind of a classic setup again. Missing professor or missing person. Papers to go through and follow up as clues. So lots of them. We discuss the fate of Professor Brockelman, and we see some of that there. And that's a great piece of artwork, but you're kind of going, yes, it's a pity you never kind of quite show that to the player characters, to the investigators, but you get out to what he's been involved in, and we have the Bass Estate, another mouldering mansion, as well as a zoo. And there's definitely got to be something in the aquarium, which includes a horror, the Devourer. And then we've got, last here, we've got the handout section with the table of contents and the list of all the handouts. That's a nice inclusion at the end of the book. The handouts aren't really anything special. They're workable in general, but up to the standard again of sort of like 1990s. So yes, surprisingly, I did have a look to see whether this had been reviewed anywhere, and it hasn't been, that I can see. So I'm looking forward to giving my opinion on that, giving a read, and telling and explaining what I think. From what I gather, it doesn't have a particularly fine reputation. It's a collector's piece more than scenarios you would necessarily run. The scenarios are perhaps a bit more physical in nature than investigative in places. So, you know, it's a curio from a licensee 30 years ago, but that'll be interesting to review at some point. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this unboxing in the Nook. If you have, please do click on the like button down below. And of course, if you've got any comments or feedback, I appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to yet more unboxings in the Nook, where you'll see me out here with a parcel containing a book or a game which I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so. All, of course, accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea. Then please do hit that subscribe button down below. In the meantime, thanks again for watching another unboxing in the Nook. I'll be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.